I'm really excited to be moderating this panel of international guest speakers who will be talking to us about their experience of working with different algorithmic solutions recommenders and talking about their challenges in and opportunities in public service organisations. Most importantly of all, we're deeply grateful for all of them for waking up at a terrible time. A special shout out to Helen. She's 1 hour earlier than everybody else in Central European time. So we're just so lucky to have your expertise and knowledge with us today, and we really appreciate you making that time, getting up early, having an extra cup of tea or coffee. I'll provide a really quick introduction, but I'll let our panelists provide a more fulsome account. So we have Charlotte Kiltz from ZDF. We have Helen J, who's part of the Responsible Innovation Centre for Public Media Futures, which is based within the BBC and is BBC aligned, but is not the BBC. She'll explain more about that later. And Karlijn Goossen from NPO. And ZDF is the German public service media, and NPO is Dutch public service media. It's also worth noting at this important point that we are recording this. I'm sure our journalist colleagues appreciate the value of good content, as do our ADM+S colleagues. So for this session, Chatham House rules are not in operation, and this will be publicly available. So that's something to keep in mind. I'll also just quickly introduce myself. Again, I'm James Meese, Associate Professor at RMIT University, and I've got a research project in addition to EVA doing some work on aligning personalised recommendations with the public interest. So that's kind of my broad work and what I do, and developing technical tools and conceptual frameworks to develop these kind of metrics. But that's enough about me, and I would really like to start bringing in our excellent panel. So maybe I could start with you, Charlotte, because you're kind of first in my panel. Could you just provide us a brief introduction to yourself and your role, and maybe really briefly your own organisation?
Yeah. Thanks for the invitation. I'm at ZDF, German public value broadcaster media, and I'm Deputy Chief of Department of Automation and Data Products at ZDF. Maybe to introduce the organization, public media landscape in Germany is really special because we don't have one public value media service provider, but two. ARD being the second one. ZDF is responsible more for nationwide broadcasting, and ARD is more responsible for regional content, and we are supposed by law to be in a competition. But also to collaborate, which makes for very interesting conversations and very interesting collaborations with ARD. And we've actually made a recommender architecture that is now open source and used with ARD. And we have a lot of public value metrics to measure quality of recommendations. And yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlotte. I'll pass to Helen now.
Oh, hello, everybody. Sorry if my voice is a bit croaky, but I'll get there. So as James said, I'm a researcher at the Responsible Innovation Centre for Public Media Futures, a very grand sounding title. It's a research centre essentially kind of hosted within BBC R&D, but it's funded independently. So it's funded by the people who fund like higher education research in the UK. And we funded to produce research at the intersection between public media values and technology. My background is in media policy. I've always worked in public service media, and my particular research that I'm looking into is, which is in its early stages, I should say, we've only been up and running for a few months, is around personalisation in the public interest. So looking at exactly these topics that you guys are discussing today around recommender systems, around personalised media experiences, and how that reshapes public service media. And the aim of the centre is to produce kind of actionable research that can kind of inform academic scholarship and industry practice and public policy. So I'm not quite a representative of the BBC in the same way as the other speakers, as James said. I can't speak in detail. I don't own the systems, the recommender systems, but I can give an overview of what it's doing and of the BBC, which, perhaps probably most people are familiar with. But BBC is the UK's biggest and oldest public service broadcaster, funded by the licence fee, operates national, international, local services alongside a suite of, and alongside its broadcast channels, it's increasingly focused on its digital services, which include news, iPlayer, sound, sport, children's and education. And as audiences kind of move towards streaming and digital consumption, aiding the discoverability of our content is increasingly important, which is not just about news for the BBC, but across all of its genres: TV, radio, news, sport. So yeah, kind of providing personalised recommendations is a kind of has been a big priority, increasingly a big priority for the organisation. But BBC is also conscious, as all public service media organisations, of doing that in a way that is in line with its values. So that's the kind of work that I'm trying to support. And yeah, really happy to be here today.
Great, thanks so much, Helen. And Karlijn.
This is a difficult lineup to follow up, right? These wonderful introductions. Thanks for having me. My name is Karlijn. I work at NPO. I'm a coordinator of Journalism 360 there. I lead digital strategy, news product development, editorial innovation, all focused on providing high quality audience-centered journalism across all our platforms. Aside from my job at NPO, I also dabble into a bit of research. I have been doing that for several years. I worked in academia before I re-entered the industry. So I still do a lot of work on leadership development in the Netherlands, and I'm a board member also for several funds. I oftentimes thus work with journalism in the area of the public arena and public value. As far as NPO, NPO is the coordinating body. Charlotte mentioned the German situation is a bit unique. The Dutch also is. We have at NPO the position that we are a coordinating body for our 13 newsrooms. We work thus with a range of public broadcasters. Some are member-based, with distinct identities and rooted also in social groups or civil society. Other ones are focused more on specific tasks such as news or cultural programming. And together they form a rather unique system designed to reflect the diversity of Dutch society, formerly known as pillarization of society. Currently, our broadcasting system is undergoing major transformations, and we are facing significant budget cuts, the largest we have ever faced. 20% of our budget is being slashed in the upcoming 2 years due to the political situation in the Netherlands. And thus we're faced with reshaping how our public broadcasting is organized, funded, but also delivered to our audiences. We have a strong emphasis on safeguarding the public value, so thus a link with your conversation today. I think that's it for now. Thanks for having me.
No worries, thanks, Karlijn. Well, maybe not, because I might stay with you if that's okay. And maybe you could take the kind of innovations that, well, in your case, I think particularly one innovation that I'm very excited about that you can speak to, relating to the kind of change in how you've kind of distributed content and the way you've thought about public value through that process.
Yeah, sure. Let me first say that I think we've done quite a bit of a wonderful work, but we're also far from reaching our endpoint and having the solution. But what we were facing at NPO 2 years ago was a situation where we saw rising high levels of news avoidance in the Netherlands. Mind you, comparing to the global situation, we're all fairly well. Still a lot of people consume our public service journalism, but still we see a rise. We see about 65% of Dutch audiences who identify as news avoiders, and of that 65%, about 30 or 40% is a really regular news avoider. And at the same time, we still see not only in public service media at NPO, but also other areas of the Dutch industry, that there's a high focus on audience reach figures. So there's measurement in a mass media paradigm, but we're faced with high levels of news avoidance of people who are saying, I'm doing other stuff and I'm looking for a more balanced way of consuming information, and a way that I find more valuable and fit for taking care of my own well-being. So we saw at NPO that within these 13 broadcasters we're really trying to fight for the momentum of being in people's timelines, even though people have really busy lives already, and that we were also really targeting and valuing those reach metrics in a sense. So that made for the situation that both for the audiences and for newsrooms, we noticed that also in conversations, but also in reach, that these targets are starting to feel like a burden in a sense, and that we're in a sort of rat race of relentlessly chasing clicks and engagement, and thus contribute to overkill and fatigue and avoidance. Adding to that was the conclusion from the last year's digital news report by Reuters Institute that the answer to news avoidance for a lot of newsrooms, not only in the Netherlands, but we've been hearing the conversation quite a bit, is that the answer to that would be to produce even more news and to be more in people's timelines and to have higher engagement rates and click-through and time spent on pages, even though thus the research says something different: produce less and produce more focus. The answer in the industry is produce more and then keep chasing these metrics. So we had a question posed to independent researchers Maaike Olij and Jekke Mink, a lot of credit to them, and asked them to start working with newsrooms to see if they could develop a dashboard to try and focus on other metrics and help us thus really anchor a focus on public values in our portfolio. Let me skip through a lot of issues due to the time constraints here, but what we ended up was nowhere near a dashboard. So we didn't end up with a quantitative way of looking and focusing our portfolio, but we ended up with what we've been calling the public method. So a ROSE model in which we combine both a focus on serving individual needs, but also serving societal needs. So being able to focus our portfolio also on, for example, yardsticks that are not the same for all products we make, but that make a difference between what investigative formats have as a purpose and as value measured or evidence collected of the value of that, and differ that from current affairs news and news for young people, for example, which caused us also the need to develop different, more qualitative ways of stimulating the conversation, of deciding what the focus of specific titles is, what value are we trying to serve, both individually and both societally, give that words, and then also see with help of templates we've developed to help the journalists in the newsrooms work and focus and have reflective conversations ever so often to keep track of the value and the sort of promise that they make to the audiences. So there's examples of programs who have made their main focus of being able to do better representation, more diverse voices of also rural communities in the Netherlands. And they, for example, came up with a completely non-digital metric of the apple pie metric. Every city that they visited, there were people who were really happy that the newsroom created a pop-up newsroom where people could really walk in to the house of journalism that they there built. And every now and then they scored how many apple pies they had or how many people brought them some sort of gift. An investigative newsroom really wanted to offer more visuals and more evidence to audiences also, and be able to communicate that of the process of the journalism that they produce. So all of the people that they called, and all of those people feeling pressure from investigative journalists being on their case. So they created a brand of sweatshirts measuring the drops of sweat that these journalists put in the work that they did. So we're really also looking into different alternative ways of measuring value and impact. Clearly, we're also still having the quantitative side and all of the digital metrics, but we're really trying to balance and create a different narrative in a sense.
Thanks so much, Karlijn. And don't worry, we'll get to the issues in a second and the opportunities as well. I might bring Charlotte back in here, and maybe you could take us through ZDF's recommendation journey and the process you've been through there.
Yeah, exactly. So we actually launched a new website in March, a very big platform that is almost completely automated, which is kind of a challenge. Yeah? So it's really our recommender system is actually a core component of it right now. And we're very proud of that, but it comes with some challenges, pretty similar to what Karlijn just said. Especially, we've been talking a lot about metrics and so on, but first of all, obviously we optimized on viewing volume and clicks, our first recommendations. That led to our editors. We are very close with our editorial teams for our platform. So we have a streaming platform actually, where it's mostly viewing content, not so much news content. And our editors were very critical. Yeah. So why do you only recommend stuff that's popular, and why do you only recommend stuff that's that everyone sees all the time? Like we have this news content, comedy content, everyone is watching that at some point. So we noticed we needed to introduce some more metrics, some different metrics. They're called public value metrics. We call them like that. For example, we measure diversity, serendipity. We measure catalog coverage and popularity. So we measure how all these metrics to check if our system actually delivers public value. And that's especially important at first in talking with editors, because what are editors doing? If you recommend content automatically, they're coming to you and they're telling you, like, why is my content not at the top? So my content is good, why shouldn't it be the first thing at the top? And you need to start and have actually bring them proof to show them that's the reason why you're not at the top. We can like always recommend the stuff that's popular. We can do that, but then we won't be having the complete broad content that we actually have in our mediathek. We give it no chance to be viewed. We give no diversity, no public value actually. So we started out implementing our own tracking system. We implemented A/B testing to actually make small changes in the algorithm, optimize one public value metric, for example, and show editors, actually show them, see this metric performs better in this algorithm, and this metric performs worse in this algorithm. So that was actually something where they started to accept, yes, we have an automated system. It's not something where they can really curate anymore. They can actually give a focus on prime content, so they can tell us this one, this is prime, but they can't actually do more than that right now in many cases. So we started out with only one cluster or one thing, but right now we're have taken over the whole platform with our automated recommendations, to be honest. Yeah, and we were pretty proud on that about that. And the next challenge that we had though was now we're kind of 2 years ago we were encouraged to share our technology with AID. And that was something that obviously at first, since we are supposed to be competitors there, was not the first thing that we thought was a good idea, right? So because this is a core component of our recommender system, and for us, it's like also a tool to be competitive, right? So we want to have the most viewing volume. We don't want AID to have the most viewing volume. And so we actually had a lot of discussions with them. We were pretty set on collaborating on this technology. And what we decided in the end was to actually not give them the actual algorithm, but to share with them our architecture to serve algorithms, right? To deliver data or to collect data, to deliver models and to deliver recommendations and to host their own models. So where we're at now is that AID is actually continuing to improve our architecture together. We keep the hat on for the architecture that can use our system, and they're using it very widespread. So many of the smaller subsidiaries of AID that AID consists of all implemented our recommender architecture, sometimes even using our algorithms. So we're at that point. But they all implemented that, they're using that, and we collaborated on improving our architecture there. So yeah, this is a pretty interesting journey, and it's still full of conflicts actually. Meanwhile, we've been actually seeing, okay, not all the data we are getting from in-house of ZDF is really as good as it should be to recommend really good stuff. So there's a bigger transformation going on in ZDF as well. We're moving towards a new organization where we implement our architecture pretty well. We have a good director there who can make decisions towards that. And we'll probably continue collaborating with AID on more technology.
Fantastic. Thanks, Charlotte. It's actually really great to hear already just some really interesting ways of engaging innovatively with metrics and thinking about the Dutch experience, where there's some fantastic novel ideas that I think we're going to, definitely think about over here, but also that journey in ZDF that you've taken on with the journalist, where there's been a kind of process of learning. And last but not least, Helen, I'm not sure if you want to speak to one specific innovation or give us a kind of broader vista of what's happening at the BBC.
Yeah, so I guess it's less of a single innovation and probably more of a focus on process, but actually just really speaks to that point that you were just making. I think for the BBC, a real focus has been on building interdisciplinary teams and processes to make sure that editorial experts and data scientists and product managers and user experience people are all inputting into the development and review and delivery of the recommender systems. And I think what that brought on was the recognition that ultimately, like, editorial teams are steeped in years of experience in the kind of public service kind of nuance and judgments that they make every day about editorial values and about risk and compliance issues and all of those things. But then it's data scientists and it's product people who are building the recommender systems. And so even though they are working in-house and the BBC develops its own recommender systems and not kind of bought in from anywhere else, sometimes often those people come from kind of different backgrounds, different kind of skill sets. And so kind of like, yeah, building that kind of public service culture in the development of the recommender systems was really felt to be really important, and kind of embedding editorial input was a key way to do that. And it kind of brings me to a core principle of BBC's approach. It can be described as kind of human in the loop, where kind of editorial humans kind of review and iterate those automated systems. So there are editorial experts kind of embedded into the squads responsible for the development of specific recommender systems, and their role is to kind of review it for the kind of things like risk and compliance with kind of the regulators sort of broadcasting code, so things like impartiality or child protection and harm and offence and that sort of stuff, as well as sort of thinking about things that they might want to kind of like promote. would say like human in the loop. It's not just about recommender systems as a key part of the BBC's approach to kind of AI generally. Published a sort of set of principles last year which stated that our use of AI will be accompanied by effective and informed human oversight. So that's like a really important element. And I guess the kind of third part is around the development of business rules, which essentially sort of set the guardrails for the recommender systems. And that could be things like amplifying certain pieces of content, blocking old content, down-weighting certain things so that they kind of only show up in very specific instances. So those are kind of clear shareable documents that sort of everybody who's involved in the recommender systems will review and will have access to. That includes some specific rules around news. I would say the kind of BBC sort of probably been more cautious around building a news recommender system than others for all of the reasons and risks that I'm sure you guys have been talking about today. But what they have done, they have developed some specific rules around what we do have. For example, if a piece of content has received flags as being editorially sensitive, like contempt of court risks or something like that, that's taken out of the recommender system. Obituaries, just some of those things that, you know, like feel like they might be sensitive, or specifically kind of political content, because BBC is driven by a need to be impartial, it sort of tends to filter out explicitly political content other than what are called kind of explainer stories, which are kind of almost like discrete pieces of content that say, we're explaining an issue, here's one, this is, you know, they're designed almost to be that impartial sort of standalone pieces of content. So they tend to be kind of like upweighted in that system. And I guess just like one final sort of overarching point that I would want to add is, I think that the kind of work in making sure that the recommender systems are sort of geared up with a public service kind of mindset is not just about kind of single calculation, but lots of it is about, it's not being about too technology focused on the solution, but actually really thinking about the kind of people and the processes and the kind of systems and the collaboration and all of that stuff that needs to be set up to support it. And I think that's a big part of what the BBC has been trying to achieve.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Helen. We've definitely already had a few conversations about risk. So this is perfect. And you've really set me up well for the next question. So I was going to ask really specifically about, I know we've kind of covered this more broadly, but the specific maybe process of developing those public service values. And I know in some cases and we're kind of experiencing this here, getting from what are quite big macro level concepts into, you know, a metric or what have you can be quite challenging in many ways. And as Helen notes, that's not the only thing we do, but it's definitely one part of the puzzle. I know, Karlijn, you've deployed surveys and similar kind of methods and processes to generate a sense of what public value looks like for NPO. Did you want to speak about this process from the NPO perspective?
Yeah, sorry, I had a bit of a hiccup in my, so would you mind phrasing the first part of your question again?
It was just mainly thinking about how you actually produce public service value in a metric. And I was just thinking about the NPO surveys and that kind of process. Yeah, right. Yeah, so as said, what we did is ended up with is very much Helen was speaking to that in the last part, emphasizing that is what we do at NPO at the moment is especially focusing on facilitating the conversation between colleagues. So making explicit what kind of values are front and center in different formats. So what we realized, as said, is that by using one sort of yardstick of reach or engagement or well performance in clicks and time spent, that didn't really help us decide what the value actually is of the different sort of formats or content that we had, and it sort of focusing on online first strategies, right, offers a lot of online metrics, but then we ended up with loads and loads of metrics and also the realization of what are we actually measuring and what are we actually deciding for. So what we did is develop these templates
like really business model canvas sort of format. If anyone is interested, do let me know, and I'll send you all of the stuff that we developed. But what we did is develop these templates, and they really help facilitate the conversation for colleagues. So it necessitates colleagues to, both on an individual and on a social level, give words to what a format or whole ecosystem or a specific segment of a program is aiming for. So in a jobs to be done way, people have the problem that, or society has the problem that there is little information on health issues. We are trying to solve that problem in our format by means of doing good explainers, or contacting expert knowledge, having people be able to put in questions. You can see that in these sort of parts of our segment, and then also really provide at the end like one sentence that helps newsrooms we now see to do like weekly evaluations at the end of a week, not so much in metrics, but in a stand-up, and then have a conversational style way of weighing the value of what they promise to the audience. So it's very much a conversational sense, but then it also, I mean, I also have a background in educational sciences, organizational learning. What we find is that it really helps also cultivate a more learning organization and offers more room for reflection, aside from a focus on just, metrics. I mean, we had a lot of situations where colleagues, for example, said, we put in a lot of work for this investigative project, and it only reached like 500K of viewers linearly. It wasn't very valuable or efficient use of money, right? We should have done something different. And then what we ended up with this template is to peel off these situations and to really sort of dissect these examples, and then really come to the conclusion that if the means of this specific investigative piece was to target policymakers and give voice to people being duped by a certain development, we really the colleagues really succeeded with that, because this and that really happened. So there was new policy being made, there were people finally being heard. So if colleagues looked at the actual value of what they did, they came to the conclusion, the traditional metrics that we used to focus on, they sort of would signify it wasn't a good investment of time, it wasn't valuable for the audiences or for society. But if we looked with a different lens, in the end, it was really valuable what they did. It was only a different way of a different yardstick than current affairs news that was like pushed high on top, as Charlotte also says. So it offers us more nuance, I think, in not only measuring, but also really realizing what it actually, so asking the why question, what is it actually that we want to do with this specific format? And then how are we performing?
Great, thank you. So Charlotte, I might turn to you now, and maybe more from a technical perspective. You listed a lot of different, I guess, values that ZDF has kind of been identifying and working with. How did you find that translation process with your team into the kind of nuts and bolts of the system?
Yeah, actually, as I just said before, it was like a process, right? So we started out reading papers, knowing to optimize our algorithms on viewing volume was the first start, but then to really go into public value metrics like diversity, where we are saying, okay, we are not only recommend content that is successful, but as Karlijn said, is also like give new stuff a chance and have niche content also showing. There's a lot of data needed to calculate that, right? You need not only the content itself and some usage data, but the most important thing is that you have a base of good metadata, right? So the biggest issue was that how do you calculate the diversity of a content towards another content, which is the base for having a diversity metric. That is obviously by having like a good value for genre or a good value for what kind of mood is this supposed to reflect, or what kind of whatever, yeah, different metrics are we can different metadata we can use there, but the actual metadata weren't good enough to do that. We started out with like a very high level category. So we just started out because we said, okay, we need to do something to reflect diversity. And it was not really a very good category in any way, because it was not driven by data. It was not driven by being able to measure something like diversity, right? It reflected more a editorial spirit or editorial category, right? So we made, before launching like the new platform, we actually set up a whole team of editors that were responsible to look into the unbiasedness of metadata in our content. So what they did, or what they're still doing and continue to do is make sure that the metadata concerning the content is unbiased first, because if that is unbiased, we can make sure that our recommendation is unbiased. Never something like that. It's never unbiased, right? But we can determine the bias. What we actually set up at first was a big open data platform, from the technical side, right? To be able to join all data sources within ZDF and measure their quality, and being able to say, our set of data contains X contents of the genre, I don't know, traveling, right? And X contents of the genre, I don't know. So, and then we were able to start to improve on that, and being able to see what content is actually there, and being able to really detect portfolio or lacks in our portfolio, right? That was the first step that we identified. But as I said, this is something that you can wait a long time for, yeah, your metadata being correct and your data being correct. Yeah, this is like, you need to start we started at least, yeah, some parallel processes there. One thing, okay, data, guys, we need better data, look at this quality metric. And on the other hand, really just start out, take the data that you have, that's what we did, yeah, and try to go ahead with that data that you have, and also show the imperfections. And what we really did, what helped us a lot, was to publish everything we did there, every algorithm that we wrote, every business rule that we are actually using, and every data used on a website that's publicly available, also for editors, also for the public, yeah? Because we can really tell everyone, like, that's how we're doing it, that's how we implemented it. And if it's not that great, the recommendation, it's obviously we only have great recommendations, no, but if it's not that great, this is the reason why we have it that way as it is. And we can always send this to editors and tell them, look at this is how it works. This is the data needed. Please help us improve our data, and the recommendations will be improved, right?
Fantastic. So just to quickly clarify, this is a kind of full transparency model in many ways. Is this what you're describing?
Yeah. So we have a whole website where we explain every metric, every algorithm, and so on. And it's algorithm ZDF.de, so I can share it afterwards maybe. But it's all in German, so you might need to use ChatGPT or whatever to translate it. So sorry.
Helen, you kind of started this conversation with a discussion about collaboration and mission within the public service RMIT, but I wondered if you had any kind of thoughts or additional thoughts about this translation process, where you've got to go from these macro kind of charter statements into like these quite technical metrics.
Yeah, so I guess for the BBC, would say that that's kind of primarily done at the moment through that role of the kind of editorial curation and involving editorial teams at each stage of the kind of build and review process. So yeah, in terms of identifying the values, in a way, that's the easy part, right? That's the kind of like, they're set out in the charter, they're set out in the kind of editorial guidelines and the kind of regulatory codes. And then it's really using those kind of editorial experts to assess and review those recommender systems in line with those values. Editorial also control the kind of hierarchy of the rails on iPlayer, and within some of the rails they have a kind of blended approach where editorial have kind of chosen the kind of like the package of content, and then within that it's sort of algorithmically kind of sorted and personalized to you. So that's the kind of, I think it's kind of algatorial approach. So that's a way of sort of blending that, where they sort of say, okay, this is the kind of total bucket, and then within that, that's a kind of personalized approach. I think kind of, yeah, what that does is sort of help capture this kind of point about nuance. I think it's really important to the BBC, from the conversations that I've had with them. Public service values is not just about kind of like specific, like hard genres, like public service kind of market failure genres, like news, for example. But that kind of public service is able to kind of capture the breadth of the output that the BBC does. And that includes like entertainment programme and daytime programming, which they offer public service contributions in different ways. So I think that there's definite desire within the BBC to kind of move towards something that's a bit more kind of quantitative, from what we've just, heard from the other speakers, that can kind of codify those values more explicitly, but being able to do so in a way that kind of captures that depth and captures that kind of like nuance, I think is the kind of the conversations that we're really interested in exploring and learning from others as well, because I think it's exactly that of being able to say, okay, well, what is public service, in that specific daytime program that actually captures diversity, for example, that is not necessarily going to kind of catch up. And I guess we will talk a bit about the kind of challenges, but just to echo that point that Charlotte just made about metadata, like that is really key to being able to kind of capture this stuff in a kind of accurate way.
I think people are getting, sick of me talking. So I'm going to ask one final question, then maybe we can have some Q&A. But I'll go back to you, Helen, because I'm very much going to ask about the, maybe what you see, at least in your position, the broader challenges that the BBC have maybe navigated already, and the lessons learned as well.
Sure. So, I mean, there are many in terms of kind of the challenges, some of them which we've kind of heard about, the kind of technical points about sort of migrating systems and workflows, building kind of metadata, like recruiting the right talent, like reorganizational structures, like that stuff is like not to be underestimated. Like that stuff is like really massive, not to kind of put people off doing the approach, but like that is, it's hard work. And I think that is probably the kind of like, that's all public service media organizations are probably in a constant flow of like transformation, right? But that's a big part of it. I think in terms of kind of lessons learned, like the successes for us are kind of the values of sort of like working together in that way, that kind of building that sort of shared public service culture. I think that is like absolutely massive. I think there are things that we haven't cracked, the BBC hasn't cracked yet, probably. We talked a bit about that kind of like, those quantitative metrics. I think really interesting, again, what Charlotte was just saying about transparency. How much do users want to know? How much should they know about what goes into these recommender systems? I think again is something that the BBC is kind of thinking about at the moment, and looking at others as well. And I guess in terms of kind of like the key tension, which I'm sure everybody will be aware of, but that we sort of touched on, is like, is there this tension between engagement and some of these kind of public service kind of value metrics? And like literally, like when you're sort of optimizing and kind of playing them off against each other, what has the kind of hierarchy there? And I think that is just like an ongoing challenge. And that's not necessarily a new challenge for public service media organizations, because that's the nature of prioritizing public service value over commercial metrics, and that's the business that we're in. But I think probably the arrival of these automated systems kind of exacerbates some of those tensions. So those are probably some of the things. And I guess I would just also say there's a real opportunity for collaboration here, exactly the conversations that you guys are having between academic research and practitioners, and between kind of broadcasters across countries, because obviously we're all facing the same challenges. So
Thanks, Helen. I'll move to Karlijn now. I know we might have covered some of this in your previous answers, but maybe like the key challenge that you think that process has produced, but also whether the learning is part of the challenge or if there's an additional learning for you there.
Yeah, actually, this is a very insightful conversation, by the way. So thanks to you guys for organizing it, and Helen and Charlotte also for contributing, because clearly our digital focus is also on the same issues, but we've now chosen a different focus for now. But definitely look forward to collaborating and gaining more insights. I think the metadata question clearly is also an issue at NPO. I think when it comes to developing and implementing the public method, as we're doing now, an even larger question is a matter of leadership, I think, and culture. So we can develop loads of strategies and templates and, collect social proof that something is working. But what we see, Helen pointed at it, is that there's an intrinsic challenge also been growing for the past decades, also in public service media, of, focusing too much, I think, on commercial success metrics. And public service media also wanting to compete in a landscape of big tech sucking up the attention of audiences and also commercial enterprises in the Netherlands. And then if you want to compete in that landscape, do you double down on your own public values, and do you know what that is, and do you accept that might very well mean that you reach more niche audiences with specific content and does not have like the big boom impact kind of programming that you see other organizations have? Are you able to settle for that? Do you have the courage? Do you have the strategic insights? Do you find and see collaboration with? Helen mentioned it, the collaboration between researchers, practitioners, maybe civic organizations, so all sorts of stakeholders. That really, to me now, is our key issue, because we've noticed that in developing the public method in 2 years' time, talking to 30, 40, 50 journalists in newsrooms, the people working, producing the real doing the editorial work, they're on board. They really want to be able to better focus on public value, but it's also their leaders that they're sometimes struggling with, who want to have like big impact versus specific niche content, or and the leaders in their terms, again, they feel pressured by NPO. So colleagues in my organization, the coordinating layers that focus too much on metrics. So I think that in leadership-wise, both in the newsrooms of the 13 public broadcasters that I work with, but also in my own organization, a question of getting a different mindset, the cultural aspect, culture eating strategy for breakfast, right? That may very well be our biggest nut to crack.
Great. And last but not least, Charlotte, maybe your answer is just one word, which is metadata, but maybe it's not.
No.
Your challenges and your learnings from that process from ZTF.
So actually, recommenders, I think, are only the reflection of the whole organization behind it, right? So that's why I say metadata, because metadata is only a way to organize your organization, and data is a reflection of the organization. And I think that gets very obvious if you're talking about technical architectures, because technical architectures always reflect the inner organization, and can only be efficient if the inner organization is efficient. And I think, especially ZDF is learning right now that it is not only a broadcaster anymore, yeah, but it's like a tech company, yeah. And as a tech company, you need to change your way of decision making. Yeah, you need to need to make very straight decisions. But give enough freedom to really work at scale, and that goes in the way of what Karlijn has been saying. Yeah, it's a way of culture and leadership, to have a good governance over the technical architecture, but also leave enough freedom to be creative. And this is a very important part of ZDF and where it's changing to right now. But there's still a lot of work to be done, also in cooperation with AID.
Fantastic. Well, we will now turn to questions. We've only got 10 minutes, so they have to be very short questions and not long statements. And you also have to be brave enough to step up to this mic to look into the camera and stare down the barrel. Introduce yourself as well. So we've got 3 wonderful colleagues here from 3 great public service organisations or affiliated. So who wants to be the first to step up to the mic? Yes, come, Scott.
Charlotte, do you mind if g'day, Scott Sparky from the ABC. Hi. Can I pick up on a point that you made a moment ago about technical infrastructure being reflective of the culture, the organization? How did you, what changed at ZDF, and what were the key moments, the key pieces that gave you that clarity of decision-making with good governance and freedom for sufficient creativity to get the job done? Because it sounds so desirable when you put it like that, but I'm curious to know, what were the key moments and how did you make it happen?
Actually, it's not all suns and roses, of obviously, right? But we had a very focused department that was very product driven, and actually this thing with competing with AID was something that drove us to make the best product possible and have short decision lines. This is a very good thing, to be honest. And the next step is actually, and I don't want to draw this answer out, but in the last 2 years, we made a big restructuring organization at ZDF, and this is the biggest one in the existence of ZDF. We made a new department with over 300 people that is only concerned with program planning, delivery, and not content creation, but content planning. So we put all the functions together that need to be together to make decisions over technical architecture. So I think you need to pull all these important aspects together and have one person who is able to call the shots at some point and govern this whole process.
Hi, Mark Andreevich from Monash University. I want to thank the panel for really an amazing, fascinating panel, and James for moderating and pulling together such a great panel. I'm struck by the fact that there are a number of public service broadcasters all being brought together in this discussion. And I'm thinking about the observation that how personalization has been run or how automation has been run has borrowed a lot from commercial logics. And one of the goals of public service is to imagine a different way of using the data and automated systems. And I'm just wondering to what extent you've experienced in Europe the possibility of collaborating across public service media organizations around these types of questions. I mean, on the one hand, I realize every national context is so specific, but on the other hand, there are some big logics at work here, especially against the background of the changing media environment that kind of is the background against which these changes take place. You know, large, usually American companies with unprecedented scale and reach. Is there a way, is there some synergy in the public service sector that can respond to that? Thanks.
I think that's free to anyone, so.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that briefly, but I'm sure others from the public service broadcasters. I mean, sort of in short, like absolutely. And I think like grateful for these conversations. I think variations of these conversations sort of have gone on in the past, but there's more that can be done. I think if BBC, for example, is part of the EBU, European kind of Broadcasting Union, and that is an organisation that specifically kind of brings public service broadcasters together. They have developed a sort of their own approach to kind of personalization, like it's called the kind of Peach system, I think, which specifically like is trying to kind of like do that sort of like build something. I think there's always needs to be an element of kind of bespokeness for each broadcaster, because they know their audience, they've got their content, and you know, like the data and all of those things probably needs to be bespoke to each broadcaster. But certainly in terms of kind of like just like sharing like these kind of basic sort of like insights and learnings and experiences, I think that there's like absolutely massive appetite and opportunity for synergy.
In my experience, collaborating over various countries together is like on a technical architecture again, it's very hard, because you don't have the one person calling the shots, but everyone, even if they're ready to compromise, even if everyone is ready to compromise, you need still one organization to call the shots, to implement a joint architecture. And I think that still needs some work there. As Helen just said, we are talking very well with each other and changing experiences, but the question stays open, how to collaborate on something that needs to be productive if you have like a lot of different opinions and not one person at the top.
Fantastic. So we have time for one more question. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add like a small nugget also, that everything that Helen and Charlotte said, yes, that is exactly what is going on. And I think it's also an interesting aspect that this may, like, there's a huge need and appetite for sharing and collaborating. Then there's the question of technical architecture, clearly, of different systems that we're working with, the bespoken aspect, Helen, you're mentioning, but also in journalistic culture. I mean, there's a huge need for autonomy amongst journalists, right? So it's so deeply rooted in both individual journalists, but also in journalistic organizations. So what we see with these 13 newsrooms at NPO, I mean, it's difficult enough to get all of those like in the same direction. It's like frogs in a bucket, right? They're all sort of popping out and having their own ideas. So that, I mean, there again, also, this is sort of my point to make every now and then, but the aspect of culture is really important also, I think, here. So there's a need and an urge also to collaborate, but it's also, you know, how much are we willing to give up our autonomy individually because of knowing the end result will be better. But EBU definitely does a lot of work, and they're also at the moment, I think, organizing several sort of programs to have different levels of leadership go through courses that focus on public values and how you work that into your technical architecture, your recommendation systems, your editorial decision makers. So at NPO, we're recommending a lot of colleagues from different newsrooms as sort of starting to create a coalition of the willing, and then go from there to create some leverage.
Fantastic. Well, we're running a very tight ship here in terms of time, so I'm sure we could keep talking for the next 10 to 30 minutes. But I wanted to spend just this brief time to really thank all three of you for waking up so early in the morning and giving us your expertise and knowledge. I'm sure there's lots of people in this room who will be willing to repay the favor for an 1 a.m. call on a panel. So don't be afraid to lean on us in the future. And we're really looking forward to continuing these conversations into the future. But please join me in thanking our panel.